F1 Manager 2022 is the first licensed F1 management game since forever. And now we've played it, all we can think of is tyre compounds and safety cars. Here are all the reasons you should be excited for it. Being an F1 team principal looks brilliant, doesn't it? You get to tour the world, constantly throwing shade at your colleagues in interviews, and then getting soaked in champagne. And while that does sound strikingly like our own jobs here on the Logitech G YouTube channel, there's something about the glitz and glamour that makes F1 Manager 2022 seem like the dream day job. We already gave you a glimpse of F1 2022, which is out now and is the perfect game to get the most out of your G923 with True Force. But now it's time to suit up, grab your clipboard and take a look at why F1 Manager 2022 is worth wishlisting ASAP. Before the lights go out, subscribe if you haven't already and you'll get our videos hot and fresh out of the content oven as they drop. And leave this video a like if you're excited as we are for F1 Manager 2022. The first and most obvious thing we're excited about here is that we're getting a fully licensed F1 management game on PC for the first time since Limp Bizkit were charting. And wallet chains were a legitimate fashion choice. EA's F1 Manager was the last release before it, hitting the shop shelves, whatever they were, in 2000, and featuring the 1999 season's teams and drivers. Eagle-eyed F1 fans will have noticed there's been a few subtle changes to the sport since then. In '99, there was a Verstappen at the back of the grid and a Schumacher at the front. And now there's a Schumacher at the back and a Verstappen in the steward's room. Zingers aside though, it's been way too long since we've had the chance to play Team Principal in Formula 1. And although 2017's fantastic motorsport manager did tide us over, there's nothing like the real thing.
Let's try and push up to Raikkonen. Copy.
What really struck us during our hands-on time with F1 Manager was just how quickly time flew by during a race. And it wasn't because we had the time set to ×8 speed. In fact, it didn't even occur to us to fast forward, because we were way too engrossed in swapping between ERS deployment levels and watching tyre deg telemetry against projection graphs. That probably doesn't sound as fun as getting a sick no-scope headshot, but honestly, balancing our time and attention between the corner-by-corner needs of two drivers on different strategies was a real buzz. And one of a different kind than you get actually driving a car like in F1 22. And it's definitely scratching a different itch to the one we get managing slower business ventures like our Anno 1800 Empire. The cars, drivers and tracks are all present and correct in their 2022 spec finery here, but developer Frontier is clever about how it's using that official F1 license, and it extends beyond visuals. While you manage the race, you'll hear real team radio messages between race engineers and drivers, sampled from real races.
Okay, we'd like you to slow down, please. Copy.
It adds an extra level of immersion that we just haven't been treated to before in an F1 game. No offense, Jeff. And it deepens the fantasy that you really are the team principal, sitting there on the pit wall overseeing the operation. What's interesting is that even after drivers and engineers start moving around between teams in subsequent seasons, the team radio messages are still there. So even if Lewis and Bono are parted, they'll still be chatting to their new colleagues in the future.
Alright, let's push. Copy.
Alpine just advanced!
Even though the real sport has occasionally struggled with close, hard-fought eventful races thanks to all the turbulence from aero parts, Frontier's take on F1 crams just enough drama into a race distance. It doesn't feel unrealistically action-packed or scripted, but there are definitely driver errors that bring out safety cars, unpredictable weather changes, and other scenarios that get the likes of Toto and Christian throwing headsets and waggling knees. Because a safety car or a downpour is a great opportunity to take quick, decisive action and change to a strategy that takes advantage of cheap or free pit stops. We had just such a moment at Baku when Joey Guan Yu outbraked himself and stuffed his car into the barriers, bringing out a safety car. That gave our Alpines time to pit in and lose less time than they would under normal race conditions. which would have given Fernando and Esteban P4 and P5, if we told them to take better care of the tyres in the latter phase of the race. Live and learn. So far, we've been talking mostly about the mid-race stuff, but you're running the operation between race weekends too, from overseeing the development of new parts to hiring and firing key staff. This is the nuts and bolts stuff that lets you really grow your team from a minnow at the back of the grid to a championship contender. Because however good your pit stop strategies might be, they're not going to compensate for your clangor of a car going 2 seconds a lap off the pace. Instead, you gather your funds and patiently develop better parts over time until one day your Tyrrell becomes a Mercedes. Another clever use of the license Frontier holds for F1 Manager 2022 is its use of real drivers from junior formulas in the talent pool. So if you have an eye on the real F2 Championship, you can use that knowledge of the best drivers there for your own team scouting. Will Dan Ticktum get that big move up to F1 after all? Or will you nab Jack Aiken away from his reserve driver contract at Williams and turn him into the next George Russell? These youngsters can get a bit rash in the race though. I wonder if Alonso and Hamilton would be teammates again if the price is right. While we do still boot up a bit of Motorsport Manager on PC and scratch our itch for the glamorous life examining fuel graphs, it came out 5 years ago now, and on sheer visual terms, F1 Manager 2022 is just light years ahead. Unreal Engine is powering this one, like basically every other game released in the last 400 years. But it does scrub up well, doesn't it? Not since EA's aforementioned F1 Manager have we seen a fully 3D environment with cockpit cams, accurate liveries and front wings modelled with every fin and flap lovingly rendered. It doesn't look too far off Codemasters' F1 games to our eyes, a series that routinely has us squinting to check we're not watching Sky Sports by accident. Lastly, the thing about F1 Manager 2022 we're most looking forward to is the gargantuan task of taking control of a team at the back of the pack like Alpine and plugging away until it's the best car on the grid. Strategy and management games are all about long-term goals, and this one's certainly not going to be achieved in a season or two. Hamilton will be long retired before we get this thing on pole. Even Verstappen might be. But what an achievement it'll feel like to flip the running order of the grid on its head.
This was a simply stunning performance from the Alpine driver.
And that's why we're fidgeting around at our desks waiting for the 30th of August when F1 Manager 2022 arrives. But who'll be leading the championship in real life by that date? Tell us your predictions down below, leave us a like to tell YouTube to show you more great F1 gaming related content, subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next one.